Welcome to Behind the Mic with AudioFile magazine. I'm Michele Cobb, and we're celebrating AudioFile selections for the best audiobooks of the year. Today, we're talking about science fiction and fantasy, and special guest award-winning narrator Eunice Wong joins me. Let's kick off with the list of AudioFile's 2025 best audiobooks in science fiction and fantasy, and you can find all of these titles on our website at audiofilemagazine.com. Here we go. Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, read by Liz Femi, Anthony Oseyemi, Jason Culp, and Chris Djuma. Down in the Sea of Angels by Khan Wong, read by Eunice Wong. The Hymn to Dionysus by Natasha Pulley, read by Sagar. KATABASIS by K.F. Kuang, read by Morag Sims and Will Watt. The Raven Scholar by Antonio Hodgson, read by Daphne Kuma. The Winter Goddess by Megan Barnard, read by Aoife McMahon and Aidan Kelly. All right, that was a mouthful. Thanks for joining us today, Eunice.
I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I have to ask, how does it feel to get a Best of the Year nod for this title?
Oh, it feels amazing. I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I grew up, with Star Trek: The Next Generation in my blood, and Star Wars, and Battlestar Galactica, and Interstellar is like my desert island movie. So I'm so excited about this.
So tell us a little bit about Down in the Sea of Angels for anyone who is not familiar with the title.
Yeah. So what's really unique about this book is that there are three different timelines. And in a way, it's classified as sci-fi, but there are also, because the other two timelines are set in 2006 and 1906, it's actually like sci-fi, historical fiction, and contemporary fiction all woven in together. So that's really exciting to me. So the main, I guess, lens that you see everything through is from the 2106 point of view, and that is from a character named Maida, and she is what's called a scion. There was an event in, I think, like the 2070s or something, where the sky lit up with like northern lights for a year, and it imparted these what they call psionic abilities, which we would probably call psychic abilities, on a small portion of the population, and the world changed. It kind of like went out of the dark ages, which is like what we're heading into now, and it's like this new world, right?
Yes.
And then there's a timeline in 2006, which of course is far closer to our time, with Nathan, who is a tech designer and who lives this incredibly hedonistic lifestyle. And he starts to question, this culture of consumption and excess that he lives in and the choices that he makes in his own life. So he's searching for a greater purpose, a better way to live, right? Rather than just consumption and capitalism and excess and, the kind of culture that is pushing the planet past the brink. And then the third timeline is Li Nuan, who is a sex trafficked young girl in San Francisco in 1906, just before the big earthquake that leveled San Francisco. And it is her life being enslaved in a brothel, trying to escape, and the exploitation of girls and women in that time. And they're all held together by one object. And I should have mentioned that Maida from 2106, her special psionic power is that she can touch an object and know its history. So there is this one very special object that is a jade teacup that has come from hundreds of years before. And this is the one object that links all three of these timelines and their quest to fight against exploitation, to fight against environmental destruction, all these massive evils of the world. And these three characters and these three timelines come together to do that.
So how did you keep track of all the timelines and, besides being held together by this one object, it seems like a lot to remember and think about as you're recording.
Yeah, I didn't find it that hard. I thought Khan's writing was it's so cinematic, and the 3 timelines are very, very clear and distinct from each other for the most part. So keeping the timelines and what was happening in them separate was not that hard for me. It was actually pretty much the same as, a lot of audiobooks where I narrate different points of view, different characters. It was just that they had their own worlds and their own given circumstances. So that wasn't that different. But what was really interesting about this particular book was that there were elements of different timelines that would bleed into the others. And I was thinking about this looking at the cover of the book because it's kind of this tie-dye, very colorful aesthetic. And I thought, huh, it's kind of like the bleeding through of colors, from one
Hmm.
timeline into another. And the other thing that was trickier to not keep straight, but to be aware of is that there are a lot of altered states in this book. And so it wasn't so much like one timeline from another, but like what kind of mental state is the character in? So, like, for instance, Maida, when she goes into her psionic trances, when she's scanning an object, she goes to a different place. Like, it is no longer the reality around her. That melts away, and she is getting flashbacks of where the object she's scanning has come from, what it's been through, who has owned it, its whole history. Nathan, he's a hedonist. He goes to like Burning Man every year and is big in the drug scene. So he goes on like these acid trips or, he takes these hallucinogenic mushrooms. And so that's another altered state. And then Li Nuan, the girl from 1906, when she touches the teacup, she is not psionic like Maida, but she gets these visions when she touches the teacup of the, impending earthquake, but she doesn't know what they are. She just sees, like, fire and destruction, and they come out of nowhere, and so it's these, like, flash cuts out of a scene of regular reality into, like, a drug trip or a psionic trance or a vision of an earthquake. So that required just being incredibly aware of the text and where it was going, just so I didn't find myself suddenly, like, in the middle of an earthquake vision and be like, "What's happening? Where did I come from here?"
So this is all very fascinating and so intricate. And I often find that in science fiction and fantasy because you are setting up these new worlds. So I'm curious, what unique challenges does this particular genre face when you're narrating a book?
I would say that what's really, really important, I mean, in any genre, but particularly in sci-fi and fantasy, is that you've gotta take everything seriously. And I
Hmm.
don't mean, like, don't have a sense of humor about it, but just, like, the world building that happens in these genres can be so removed from our reality, but as the narrator, as the actor moving through it, this is the reality of the characters. And so you have to take on that mindset of this is absolutely the world, right? And I am going to present it as this fully inhabited, fully realized reality. Like I said, that's true for any genre, but it's especially true when you're painting this new world for listeners. I would also say that fantasy is particularly tricky for me, because I didn't have the kind of grounding in fantasy as I do in sci-fi, just on a personal level, and sometimes I feel like in fantasy, they're so epic that it's like herding cats sometimes, where it's like you have a billion characters and a billion worlds and billion languages, and you're trying to, like, keep everyone, like, corralled and in the same story. Other narrators, I'm sure, have mentioned this, but, like, the pronunciations sometimes in fantasy can be hurdles, and I like to prep a lot before I go into the booth because I like to turn my brain off when I'm recording, so I can just sort of run more intuitively. But sometimes in fantasy, I'm not as familiar with the names, and so if I have to stop and, like, look up a name, I'm like, "Oh, no." I just, like, hit the hurdle and have to, like, go back and do it again.
I know for me, science fiction and fantasy present that challenge of like, what are these words? Like beyond the word building or the world building, I like someone to narrate it for me so I don't have to figure out how anything is pronounced.
It is also word building, so it's like
Yes.
world building and word building.
Any surprises when recording this particular title?
Oh, yeah, it was very cool because so of the 3 timelines, the 2006 timeline was obviously the closest to our time, but the main point of view was from 100 years from now, right, in 2106. So Maida, as a psionic historian, I guess, in a way, would be looking back at things like time capsules from the 2000s, and because they didn't experience the things that they were excavating or researching, it was a cool sort of, like, detachment from the time we live in now. So, for instance, I was playing with, like, how do you get that through in audio? So, for instance, something like Burning Man, someone who doesn't know what that is like Burning Man
Right.
or a flip phone, right? Or heavy metal. Like, what is that? It's so weird, and it was such a cool flip of perspective for me to see our time from the eyes of someone who doesn't live in it, and be like, "Wow, yeah, we're a little weird."
So this was a very intricate title, well written, interesting on so many levels. What has stayed with you about it?
So speculative fiction is one of my favorite genres because it takes an element or elements of the reality that we live in today and then sort of spins it forward and sees imaginatively, where it goes. And Down in the Sea of Angels is this wild, imaginative spinning out of our reality, but it is based in our reality. And so you find elements like a political leader who has a campaign called Operation Golden Days. Like, let's go back to the past when everything was great. There's an older character named Aviva in 2106 who I think was born or either grew up in the 2050s, and she talks about her girlhood memories of, people dying from heat or cities disappearing beneath waves, and these mysterious illnesses cropping up. And I suppose that perspective on our time is something that will stay with me, that perspective from the future, when hopefully we have gone through all of this turmoil and come out the other end. Maybe the most beautiful thing that has stayed with me is the final scene, and I don't wanna give any spoilers, but so this psionic event, the bloom that conveyed these telepathic psychic powers on a portion of the human population, did not just affect humans. And it's interesting to me because as readers, we read all the way through and then we think, "Oh, it was just humans that were affected," but it wasn't just humans. And I won't say any more than that, except that the last scene is this incredible web of connection with far more than humans. And I'm not talking about aliens, I'm talking about, like, earth creatures. And it's incredibly beautiful, and I think that too will really stay with me.
Well, that message of connection and the clear connections between the three timelines and your connection to the title, I think this is something that is a very special listen. I encourage everyone to go out and hear it. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule, narrating all of the time and doing many things to chat with us. Thanks to our audience for listening. And of course, come back Friday when Joe Reed will be in conversation with narrator Maggie Meg Reed, who is a part of an ensemble cast in the Best Multi Voice Audiobooks of 2025 category. And support for today's podcast comes from Dreamscape, an award-winning audiobook publisher with a catalog that includes authors L.J. Shen, Frida McFadden, and Katie Robert. Discover your next great listen at dreamscapepublishing.com. And thanks for listening to us today. Check out our website for all of the best of category lists at audiofilemagazine.com.